This next optional lecture is going to focus on writing dialogue. And for some of you, writing dialogue might not be a new thing, but even if you have some experience in writing dialogue, hopefully some of the techniques that I'm going to be sharing will be useful for you. So the first thing we're going to talk about are just the dialogue basics, and that is just in relation to structuring dialogue, how dialogue should be formatted and how it should look on the page. So the first is that dialogue should be separate from long paragraphs of description. I do sometimes read short stories where the student has not separated the dialogue at all. It makes it hard to read. And so that's one of the things that when you separate the dialogue, it actually makes it visually easier for the reader to continue reading your story. So that's something to consider. You do want to hit return for each new speaker or piece of dialogue. You should indent your dialogue one time, and punctuation is set inside the quotation marks. So here's an example of problematic formatting. I actually lifted this from The New Yorker, this is The Lottery. It's an excerpt from The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. And I don't know if they intended to structure it this way just because it was published in a magazine, but as you can see, people are talking, but it's all presented to us in one paragraph. And so what we see is right here, we have people talking and there's no indication or way to tell who is talking. And then if we look further down, another person has spoken. And then if we look over here, this is just the general discussion. It's the description from the previous paragraph. And so as you can see, when you actually correctly format the dialogue, it does make it visually easier for the reader to understand a couple of things. First is just reading the story itself. But then the second is, as you can see, so the first paragraph is about the background. It's just a description of somebody talking at the end of the paragraph. And because there's not a specific person talking, we just have some general ideas that people are saying. And so then we hit return when we're going to the people who are individually talking. And so when a third person starts talking, we see another person talking. And as you can see, I'm going to pull this cursor over here. Each time we have a new paragraph, you indent it one time. It should be double spaced just because it's a short story. I just wanted to make it easier to fit everything on the page. So one of the things that I want to talk about now that we've looked at just sort of the basics of dialogue are when and how to write strong dialogue. And sometimes we end up kind of falling into these hurdles by starting the dialogue with meaningless conversation. And so I'm going to give you an example of this. And this is a conversation that I actually wrote for some students one semester. And it was intended to be really bad, and one of my students asked to borrow it, and then he wrote a whole story around it and made it relevant. And so the thing that's sort of nice is that even when you do have bad dialogue, if there's a purpose to the bad dialogue, it could actually be good. But in this particular situation, there is no purpose to the bad dialogue. So it's just bad dialogue because it's meaningless conversation. So we have, "Hi, Sally," John said. "How are you?" "I am fine, John. Thanks," Sally responded. "What have you been up to today?" "Nothing much." Sally sat down. "I bought some shoes." "That's interesting," John laughed. "No," Sally said, "it really isn't." And so if we look at this, one of the reasons why this is meaningless is that it really hasn't given us an insight into these characters at all. It's almost just sort of like, my characters must talk to one another now. I don't know what I want them to say, so I'm just going to have them say things that aren't important. And the thing is, you really do want to have your characters saying things that are important. However, you also do want to avoid conveying plot points through the conversation. It's okay if you have a couple, but sometimes you end up it ends up telegraphing quite a bit. So here's the same scene, but now we've changed the dialogue a little bit so it's conveying plot points. "Hi, Sally," John said. "How are you?" "I am fine, John. Thanks," Sally responded. "I am a bit worried about my ability to sell all these Girl Scout cookies. If I don't get those 300 boxes out of the garage, then my husband will divorce me. I can't end another marriage like this." "I'm sure your husband won't divorce you," John said. "Very few women would put up with a man who likes to impersonate Count Von Count as often as he does. Didn't you find we're puppets in the basement?" And so while we do have interesting information here, I think we can be a little bit concerned about Sally's husband. This is a lot of information that is not stuff that people would normally speak to one another, especially in this way. It's sort of information dumping. And so I know that with dialogue, I do think that it takes time to sort of learn how to write good dialogue and how to edit back information that's not important. But also, you don't want to fall into the trap of just throwing all the information in there so that your reader knows the point, even if it's not really realistic dialogue. So you do want to think about how the words are spoken and how that becomes a reflection of the person speaking. And so far I've been showing you a couple of examples of weak dialogue, but I'm actually going to take you to a section from A Good Man is Hard to Find. One of the reasons why I love that story so much is because the dialogue is just so incredibly strong. We have such a sense of every character who is in the story. And especially when you look at that second part of the story where the grandmother and the misfit are talking to one another, you know so much about them. They're having a conversation, but neither of them is hearing one another. And it's incredibly significant because that's ultimately why the grandmother ends up getting killed. So anyway, if we look at this, this is the very opening scene right after they've gotten into their car accident. It says, "We turned over twice," said the grandmother. "Once," he corrected. "We seen it happen. Try their car and see will it run, Hiram," he said quietly to the boy with the gray hat. "What you got that gun for?" John Wesley asked. "What you gonna do with that gun?" "Lady," the man said to the children's mother, "would you mind calling them children to sit down by you? Children make me nervous. I want all y'all to sit down right together there where you're at." "What are you telling us what to do for?" June Star asked. Behind them, the line of woods gaped like a dark open mouth. "Come here," said their mother. "Look here now," Bailey began suddenly. "We're in a predicament. We're in—" The grandmother shrieked. She scrambled to her feet and stood staring. "You're the misfit," she said. "I recognized you at once." And so the thing that's really amazing about just this small piece of dialogue that I've presented to you, we have, I think, 5 different characters speaking. Wait, Bailey, grandmother, June Star. Okay, 6 characters speaking. And every single one of them is conveying something very different. So the grandmother's just focused on the accident and realizing who the misfit is. Bailey is outraged because he doesn't get that they're in danger. The mother does. And she's the only one who does. June Star and John Wesley are just acting like children, and the misfit is being menacing. We can see in that very first line that he says, "Once, we seen it happen, try their car and see will it run, Hiram." You know that he's not helping them with their car. He's seeing it as a car that they can use to escape. And the fact that John Wesley sees the gun right away and that the misfit ignores them, that tells us so much about who these characters are. It does reveal plot, but not in a way where it feels like we're telegraphing plot. This tells us that this is a family that is in danger, and they're not really aware of it until the grandmother decides to shriek, "Oh, I recognized you at once." So the last thing I want you to think about is why you've chosen to have the characters interact in the first place. And so again, if we go back to the scene from A Good Man is Hard to Find, we understand why these characters are interacting. On the one hand, the plot has taken to a point, them to a point where everybody is conversing with one another. But at the same time, it's also revealing the varying understandings of the situation that they're actually in. Meanwhile, we can also see that the misfit is slowly taking control of the situation. And again, as the only person who seems to understand that is the mother. Everybody else is just running around and screaming and yelling at the misfit, not understanding the danger. So a last suggestion that I have for you, just if you're not sure if your dialogue is strong, is to just read your dialogue aloud. And I can tell you that I don't enjoy reading my dialogue aloud just because I feel self-conscious. I'm actually much happier reading Flannery O'Connor's dialogue than I am my own dialogue. But if you read it out loud, then you will have a sense of, well, is this information necessary? Does it sound really stilted? Does it sound like it's not really making sense or it's not adding something to your story? So those are all just pieces about how to write strong dialogue. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is how to use your dialogue to manipulate pacing. So the first thing I have here is I said if you've just written several long paragraphs, then it's nice to insert some dialogue to allow the reader a visual break from the text. And this is something that I do consciously do. If I've got too many paragraphs, then the other side of it is that sometimes when we have long paragraphs, what you're doing is you're maybe summarizing information, but then the minute you go into dialogue, you are in a scene. And so I think that's another reason why it's important to have dialogue, because it will take you from telling to showing. So that's another aspect of it. You also can create quick, short interactions, which will cause the action to speed up. And so the example that I have here of quick dialogue is the same conversation that Sally and John had earlier. I haven't changed it much, but it is a very short, quick dialogue. Your reader is going to get through it quickly. And I sometimes, like a couple of years ago, I was writing a story and I had two older characters who would speak to each other very quickly. And the reason why I had them speak that way to each other is because they were sisters in their 80s. And I imagined them as people who were used to the world not seeing them anymore. And so the only person that they thought really saw them was the other sister. And so in having them have this sort of quick dialogue, it also gave them a shorthand of understanding where they would lock out the rest of the world and just focus on each other. And so there was a purpose to it, but it was quick and it was fun. So when you're inserting action as your characters talk to one another, that's how you can slow your dialogue down. So you can slow down the conversation when moments become more meaningful. And then this will also allow you to integrate snippets of description so that the world is not put on pause when your characters talk. And this last point is something that I do see often when students are just beginning to tell stories. Everything suddenly stops when the characters are talking to one another. And action should be continuing in some capacity. We can see that with A Good Man is Hard to Find, that action is happening while people are talking to one another. So here's the same section where Sally and John are talking about her shoes, but I've slowed it down. And in slowing it down, the thing that's funny is I've taken dialogue that seemed pointless and a little meaningless, and I've made it better because we understand why the conversation might seem so stilted. Hi, Sally. John approached, it should be his old friend. John approached his old friend warily, wondering if she remembered the last time they'd spoken. She'd been so angry with him. He paused before slowly asking, "How are you?" "I'm fine, John, thanks," Sally responded while carefully sitting down to ease the pain in her legs. She hadn't stood that long in years, and the sight of a man she'd never wished to lay eyes on again had taken her by surprise, even if she refused to show it. "What have you been up to today?" She glanced down at her feet before stating the obvious. "I bought some shoes." I'm not saying this is amazing dialogue, but I'm saying it's slightly better than the dialogue it was when I first wrote it. So anyway, I hope this lecture was helpful.